Testing 1, 2, 3. Sound check. Can everybody hear me? Red 4 standing by. Barry, Orange Tabby, Kevin, thank you, thank you. All right, gang's rolling in. Oh, excellent, excellent. Hey, Kenneth, haven't even kicked off yet. Just giving everybody a few minutes to get signed in. And of course, always leaving myself some time to deal with technical difficulties. DeCam, great. Oh. Came up with a few odds and ends to talk about. We'll also see what you guys are in the mood to chat about. Needs to say we will be talking about rigging. That's okay, we don't take roll. Hey, Daryl. Michael, great, great, great. Hello, Herman. All your legs and free. It's an old joke. You type it, I'll recite it. Not this time. We'll save that for the other channel. There have been some popular topics that have become more popular once again that we'll be chatting about today. I went and took some pictures and that got out of hand, but I'm going to talk about that also. Do, do, do. I think I figured out where I'm going to put that thing. It's probably going to go on top of the main glass shelf. I've been measuring it with its little dolly and everything. There should be enough room, although it's going to stick out some. It's one model airplane that'll probably never get dusted off. Trying to arrange my screen here where I can see all these different things. Hey, Roy. That's about time. I'd heard a rumor that they were going to reissue the Go card. It's been a while. That's actually, for a lot of people, that's one of those kits that no one can find. The what do you call them? The Eureka or Holy Grail kits, at least an original one. I actually just got an email from Atlantis that I haven't had a chance to read yet. Of course, I'm on their mailing list, but they've got a few new things coming out also, or I should say a few new repops. And well, we got just a second. I'll just take a quick look at it and see if there's anything of interest. Yeah, they're bringing back the 1/25th scale Cadillac Brom. Godzilla's back in stock. King Kong will be ready to ship soon. And 82 Camaro, 69 Nova, and a few. Oh God, they got the Bonanza, the Cartwrights thing. They have the tooling. It's been sitting around for over 50 years. So Hostel Joe and Ben Cartwright. Anyway, they got a few things coming out there looking at doing that. So there's a little bit of news coming out of there. Pete and Rick, you know, they're model builders themselves. They love the hobby. You can always tell when a company is run by somebody that actually loves the hobby. Heck, you can tell that just by reading their newsletter. It's like... Oh, Kenneth, that's actually absolutely true. And not really at liberty to say anything, but I do know there's probably possibly going to be a big batch of kits coming out on the market here pretty soon, originals. So, yep, that's right, the Nike Hercules. So I was just looking at that one. Yep, I got the Nike Hercules. I have some stuff. It hasn't happened yet, so I'm not going to talk about it. But as soon as it does, it's going to dealing with art and stuff. That hopefully in a couple of weeks I'll have some more cool stuff to show you guys. But I want to wait till it happens before I start talking about it. Outreach of the cat, yeah. Yesterday the cat, because I rearranged the shelf and making some room, the bottom shelf in the house of one of the cabinets is temporarily empty, and I slid it open so I could get those pictures of the SE5 comp, and I'm back doing something. I turn around and the cat has crawled into the bottom shelf, and I try to get my wife out to see her, but she, of course, is, as soon as you, hey, psst, come look at this, that's when the cat decides to move. But I was like, man, I didn't have my camera. That would have been a great, that's like the time I found her in the dryer. That would have just made a great photograph. One time she even got in, we've moved it now, but we used to have this corner display, and she'd gotten in that with the models without damaging anything, which really shocked me. And then again, she is a cat. A couple more minutes and we'll kick off here. What's that? The TR3E Triangular UFO, the Green Elephant Funny Car. Those are also being put back out by Atlantis. And, you know, I got to give those guys credit. They're really good about, if you're on their shopping list, you know, their list, you know, they really do put out a lot of updates and stuff, try to keep you informed. And since they're doing a lot of the older kits, they have some really wild stuff like the 177 scale F89D Scorpion, which they're hoping will have out in July. That's just the 1/55 scale F11F. Of course, we all know they were box scale kits, you know, so that was based on whatever, you know, the size of the box. We want to make this model. How small or big do we have to make it to fit in there? And pretty wild scales. Made for some interesting looking dioramas when I was a kid. Who cares if they're off scale? Oh my gosh. Well, Orange Tabby, did you get her back okay, or is she forever lost in the cooling ducts? Hey, Vic. Hey, Slugo. Oh, yeah. We're going to be talking rigging for sure. That's what I plan to kick it off with. I guess we can go and get this thing on the road. We're close enough. Let me, Hello. Hello, everybody. Buongiorno a tutti. Hope I didn't butcher that. Yeah, the 176 and the 172, that had to do with that whole double O HO thing and all that stuff. But was it 176 equals, is it double O scale in Europe and the UK? And which explains why there's so much. Even as a kid, I used to be mystified why there was so much 172nd and 170 176 scale stuff. So, first thing we'll talk about. Let me get down to it here. All right, we're going to talk rigging. And Bruce was kind enough, of Mystic Modeler Ships, was kind enough to send me these pictures, and he's the master rigger because you can see the all the stuff that he's done. And there he's got one of his ships under construction. And he's a big Easy Line guy, and he's the one that sent me the eye pins. And a lot of and I need to find some smaller ones, but I did wind up actually, the metal on the eye pins was soft enough that I could actually curly cue them and make my own. I didn't need the stem on them, so I could turn around and make my own little turnbuckles with them. But still, they were a little heavy gauge. But at this point, I was really more worried about them staying in place. Oh my God, your cat got in the garbage and didn't meow. Oh Lord. Hey Trace, welcome aboard. Guys, Trey's Models is here. If you haven't checked him out, he's been starting some videos, putting his models online. He does beautiful work. He's kind of the master of rigging World War I aircraft. He makes makes his little gas patch turnbuckle, or uses his little gas patch turnbuckles, which I actually, I'll show you a picture here. I was actually able to get a couple of them. Let's see, is it? Yeah, you can see right here in the middle, I was actually able to get one of them to go through. And finally, I was able to sort of thread them. That big shiny spot is where I had an accident with the glue. I was trying to, well, I'll just tell you the story now since we're here. Oh yeah, Bruce does some great work on the ships. The reason there's so much glue there is the gas patch turnbuckle. After I had it lassoed through there, and I thought I would save myself a little effort by just running the line through it and then running it up to the next anchor point, so I kind of get 2 for 1. And then as I was working on the model, that particular turnbuckle decided to fly and be free, and it popped out of its mounting, and that accidentally made that big glue bomb right there, trying to get it remated and hold it tension without having to completely re-rig it. And even with my tweezers, it was hard to get it in a position and hold there long. And finally, it re-anchored, and I saved it. But I got to go over that with some more paint, cover that up. So next time I use turnbuckles or the gas patch turnbuckles, I'm not going to try and sneak an extra lacing out of them. It's going to be tie it off and go. Some of you guys have told me about this Prim knitting thread. The thread I've been using was sent to me. I think Trey's, I think you sent that to me. Hey, Mark, you made it great. And you can heat it up and it'll shrink, but you can, like I say, only get away with that one time. And just because, like I say, because of the size of this thing, all the flex and everything has loosened a few things up, which is why I'm getting some sag. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go in and redo everything, but that's a lesson for next time. So I'm getting some more Easy Line, which is what Bruce uses, and as you can tell, he does. He has some really nice rigging on there, and he also makes some of his own turnbuckles. But the thing about the Easy Line, or I'm going to some of that elastic Prim thread, which I'm going to go down to Michael's and buy probably soon, is that even that tiny, you don't have to pull it taut, just that little bit of elasticity is all you need to keep the line straight. And in fact, I would, yeah, he's right up above. Trey's has just started posting some, and I think it's Trez Models. Trey's, why don't you type your your YouTube channel name in there, and I think it's just Trey's Models. But he does some beautiful World War One aircraft. Some of his pictures have been some of the viewers' builds, and I believe Trey's is the one that introduced me to gas patch. I'm probably going to buy some more gas patch turnbuckles and play with them some more. They're like anything else. The more you work with them, the better you get with them. You can look at this model and you can sort of see the evolution as you go down of, oh, that was one of his first tries, and oh, that's starting to look better. And I'm starting to develop my own little technique. And one of the mistakes, there it is right there, Trey's Models. One of the big mistakes I made was I had broken my smallest pen vise bit. So I used one that was a little larger, which made the holes a little too big. If I'd had the small one, those gas patch turnbuckle would have seated in there a little more snugly. But one thing of course, when you drill into the plastic, you're going to get raw plastic. So you can paint the model first if you want. I've seen some people do some fantastic builds where they'd already painted the model before they drilled, so that's fine. Probably use CA glue, but make sure that thing's anchored in there at the right angle. And one thing I would consider doing also is pre-threading them, at least one end. And also, if kind of my plan for the next one is going to be paint the model, drill the bit, or I got to get another tiny drill bit, anchor it with CA glue, or excuse me, first lace the top. Well, I guess you could do it either way, it doesn't really matter, but it might be easier to lace the turnbuckle first, tack glue it, and then seat that in the upper wing. Then in the lower wing, of course, you're going to drill down and seat the turnbuckle. But once you put the wings together, you're not fighting gravity to get the line into place. And then once it's in place, just hold it. And you can see in Bruce's pictures, I use those exact same little dime store plastic clamps. They're about the right. They have enough grip and they have their right weight that they tug it taut without putting too much pressure on it being too heavy. And then just let it harden. Take your time, and you get some beautiful looking models when you're done. Aren't rigging lines molded on sprues? Well, it's funny you should mention that. The very first model ship I ever built, at least sailing ship I ever built in my life when I was a kid, and it might have been a pyro kit, but I believe it was the Cuddy Sark, and all what they call the ratlins, those big triangular spiderweb lines you see going up and down the side of the masts, those were pre-molded. They were stamped plastic, and of course they were kind of heavy and off scale, but when you glued them onto the model, they looked okay. I mean, for what the kit was. But it probably wouldn't be a bad idea for a manufacturer to make long strands of thin plastic that you could use kind of the way they do balsa wood stringers. But I would imagine something that fine would be quite the little trick to produce without getting a ton of flash on it. You can get Harbor Freight does have some pretty cheap price stuff there. Yeah, it's got every bit of a couple of hundred, and it's a baptism by fire. But I got to admit, it's also a great learning opportunity. By the time I get to that Albatross, and the other World War I aircraft, I should have it pretty well. Well, I didn't have any trouble. I used Tester's glue, good point. Bias tip. Yeah. You got to use one that has the bias tip. The one of the things that my dentist told me that in medical school they taught him a phrase: access is success. And one thing I absolutely agree with is that getting access, especially when you got big paws like I do, the right tools help. But I'm pretty sure the key element is patience. Now the problem with the Felix Stowe is there's so much rigging on it, it's getting to the point that it's hard to move around the model without actually accidentally bumping something. And I'm getting to the point where well, I didn't notice that, Trey. They all look pretty good to me, but that's another thing, and this has been brought up in a couple of videos I've watched. When you mount the turnbuckles, you really want to do your best to get that angle right. Otherwise, you have the line going this way and the turnbuckle going that way, and from a distance you won't notice, but being the person who made it, you know, we're all pretty self-critical of our builds. I don't pick the model up by the wings. I only pick it up by the fuselage. And when I turn it over, I always go nose over tail very slowly. And I'm sure that's where it's picking up all the flex. But there are some things that I finally wound up actually putting a couple of boxes on my work table to get the model up higher so I don't have to turn it over. I can just work on it from underneath, which gets a little tricky. And of course, the more rigging you put on the airplane, the harder it is to get to everything, which is obviously why you do like the cross bracing between the struts on the front to rear first, because once you put the ones across the front, you're not getting in there. And I'm actually, when I get those other SE5s, the little 1/72 scale ones, am planning to rig at least one of those, but I'm going to see about getting the new stretchy line. But that, fortunately, the SE5 has a much more basic rigging on it, but I want to see if I can rig a model that small without making a mess out of it. And hey, super heavy, 6-pound test per. Hey Max, glad you made it. Yes, I have used Easy Line. Actually, the reason I didn't use Easy Line on this is there's two reasons. One, I'm running out of the stuff, and two, when Trey sent me the turnbuckles, he sent me some silver thread that he uses that looks really good because it's the right color and it's the right scale, and that's actually what it's mostly rigged with. Actually, well, yeah, that's pretty much what it's rigged with. Let me see if I got a picture here that there, and that's a right scale, right color. I did use some larger, heavier thread for control cables because it even says in the instructions those are supposed to be larger. And I still have to go in and paint these struts. The ones under the engine have already been painted, but it's just, even though the engines are exposed, it's just a shame there's so much detail on there you just can't see because the wing is in the way. And if somebody really wanted to show off what Wingnut Wings has done with this kit, what they'd have to do is they'd have to make a diorama with a maintenance scene where they could pull stuff off so that you get a better look at everything, because this model is definitely made in all three dimensions. They didn't, you could take the instructions from this and pretty much build a flying airplane from it. Easy Line is decent, but flat and the twists will show. Well, that's true. That's true. That's one reason I want to try that Prim thread. A couple of guys. Now Prim, they have like an elastic one, and it's a knitting thread, so it should be circular. It looked like it was about the right color. Caught me working a robot kit. Started to the. Well, since you brought that up, I had a little happening this morning, which I'm going to talk about later, but one thing I've learned is anytime I go in the shed, I have to stay focused, because you can get sidetracked when you walk by your work stand. Even if you just go in there to pick something up, it's real easy to get lured into working on a model when you've got other things to do. Let me just read some of the comments. Robotube, I have a suspicion that the rationale behind that was they figure if you're buying a Wingnut Wings model, you either already know how to rig or you have the resources to, pretty much. I'm waiting for the instruction sheets from a kit model company. Say, if you want more detail, just Google it. Stretch sprue is hard to get consistent. When I built my Nakajima roof, which is a Tamiya kit, when I did the Tale of Two Zeros, compared to that, the old Monogram kit, I used stretch proof the antenna wire, and after I got it done, I looked at it and realized it was, not only was it not consistent all the way through, but I had done a very poor job of scaling it to the model. I need to go in and clip that off and put some Easy Line or something on there. But it's really hard to get sprue to be. I mean, I guess if you do a lot of it, yeah. Plasmo's got a great channel, and he does a lot of fantastic builds. And The one that I forget his name offhand. You guys have probably all seen him. The guy who does the stop motion builds. That's that. Like building the kit isn't enough. He's got to stop motion every aspect of it. That is just insane. Oh my gosh. And being both a model builder and a video maker and a person who liked to play with special effects, I cannot watch that without thinking about all the work that went into it. Believe it or not, the Waddell Williams kits do come with some rubber tubing and rigging and things like that. I think it's more of a value-added feature, but that's the only kit I've ever had where there were some of other than like U-Control or RC kits or something, where that was actually included. Just saw, yeah, Tom's Motion, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, there's somebody who must first off has the patience of Job and must really be in love with what he's doing. And the thing is, he does nice builds on top of that. We'll have to go out and watch Plasmo's D5 build done. Anita, I just was looking at your email a minute ago. You were asking about Eugene Bullard, and I know that name. I've heard that name before. We were talking about World War One aircraft. I haven't had a chance to research, but I know I've heard the name, but I forget why. And people like Elliot White Springs. There were some. Every generation has its colorful people, and there were. Let's see. Yes, there are. Actually the website at Wingnut Wings is surprisingly informative, even about the aircraft themselves, not just about the models. And Tom Grigat, is that Plasmo or is that something else? Kind of getting lost here in the comments. I've used evergreen plastic for a lot of things. I haven't really seen any I thought it was thin enough to make rigging out of, but at least it's consistent. It's circular, so I suppose if it scales out right, there's no reason you couldn't do it. Might actually make things easier. Hey, Bruce, you're here. We are just talking about rigging, and I was just showing some pictures of your ships. Okay, that was not the button I meant to hit. And so I'm going to try and find some smaller eye pins, but I'm also going to try that, like I said, that Prims, and I'm going to order some more Easy Line. And of course, don't forget, depending on the color you're rigging, you also might have to paint it. If you go out to a ship, when I was on the Bounty, obviously before she sank. Oh, closer to the mic? Okay, no problem. I can do that. When I was on the Bounty, I had one of the first things I did when I got on board was tug on the ratlins and the rigging, and even though it's technically rope, or as they say in nautical terms, sheets and lines, they're hard as a rock and unbelievably strong and rigid. So, and everything's a different size. To rig a ship, of course, the human eye can't really pick up these differences when you're dealing with a model. But if you were to make a ship or a biplane completely accurate, a lot of things, and in the Wingnut Wings book, they actually tell you different millimeter sizes of rigging to use. For the control cables are bigger than the stays, and then that kind of thing. So it would be absolutely mind-boggling to try and keep all that straight, especially as complicated as a square rig or sailing vessel is. But the I did meet a master model builder at a museum. I think it was up in Boston. It was a maritime museum. You know what? It might have been the Kendall Whaling Museum. Anyway, he was in there working on this. They had a booth for him. You could sit there and just watch him work. And of course, the guy clearly knew what he was doing. But he had all these different sized threads and materials, lines to make the different size rigging on the ship. Of course, these are huge wooden models, 5-6 feet across, but something that size, that kind of detail shows. And he had his little brass turning tools and everything, and what he didn't have he could fabricate. And he was a retiree. This is what he did, and the museum gave him this place to work and gave him the models, and that's what he did all day. Kind of the perfect retirement job, except it doesn't pay. But I think he was being paid with the joy of what he was doing. And of course his work was just, he gotten fast by repetition and drill, but he didn't appear to be rushing anything. He moved at his pace, and he just had this, he told me, if you ever want to start building wooden boats, start off with a boat, not a sailing ship. Start off with something like a speedboat or something, and learn your technique on that. And don't jump into one of the big square rig ships right off the bat and never finish it. Yeah, Elliot White Springs, what I was thinking of. For those who don't know, Elliot White Springs was a very well-to-do American who was the heir to the spring-made sheet fortune. And he was, to say the least, a colorful individual. And he shot down 10 or 12 enemy planes during the war, survived the war as a captain. And I think he stayed in the reserves. So when he went home, he took over the family business. And I don't have the cartoon with me, but there's his brand of advertising was a little risque for the time because he was a colorful guy. And you could Google it, just put a buck well spent on a spring-made sheet, and you'll see the cartoon. But it caused outrage with the company PR people, but he said, nope, this is the advertiser we're going to go with. And by golly, they sold a lot of sheets. So there's that. Yeah, Dumas is still out there making kits too, as far as I know. Let's see, I'll read a couple of comments here. Oh, well, the Slugo, that would definitely make it tough. Yeah. Well, if you want to see the real nightmare, believe it or not, the Felix, though, is not the nightmare airplane to rig, although it's probably a close contender. It's those Airco pusher jobs. They had that spider web rigging all over them, plus all down the, they had that frame fuselage that had to be struck right. Oh, that reminds me of what I was going to say, was that if you go out to an airplane, you're going to find out that what we're doing is rigging is actually not cable in a lot of cases. It's flat metal. And the stays are actually surprisingly rigid. They go on something like a Stearman. They often go through where they cross. Will often be a slotted cross member they go through to hold everything in place. Because the idea of these things is to create rigidity. And of course the turnbuckle, you had bolts on each end that went into the turnbuckle. And of course the mechanics were always having to adjust the turnbuckles. Because if you turn one turnbuckle on that airplane, it affects everything in the rigging. And getting the rigging on those airplanes right was a nightmare. Okay, Bruce, we'll see you later, man. Take care. But but once it was rigged, all they had to do was just to keep it taut, unlike a ship where the masts and everything are constantly, the sheets are going up and down, the masts are moving. So you're constantly, the rigging is much more mechanical, much more dynamic. Hey, Johnny. Hey, John, glad you made it. But a lot of my rigging is definitely not works of art. But from the distance it looks good. The one thing that is kind of sad though is they give you all that detail, and this is really all you can see in the cockpit. And of course you guys know there's a full interior in there. It's just kind of heartbreaking to know that all that's in there, and it's not really visible, it almost feels like a wasted effort. Next time, like I say, I'm going to put the interior on the outside as a side display. Well, yeah, McManus is a popular build. Leno Hawker, I think he was, what was he flying? He was flying a pusher, I think, when he was killed. So I recall reading the Baron's recount of their dogfight is that Leno Hawker was one of the finest pilots he ever went up against. He just had an inferior machine. Yeah, but I know it's there. It's true. Details on the inside. That song turned out to be prophetic. Yeah, we're talking about intense builds, and two of mine are the Felix Stowe and that Lindbergh wagon, which stagecoach, which was actually originally a Mark's kit. Those are two of the most intense builds I ever had. And I was thinking maybe you guys, if you had something particularly. Well, it's funny you mentioned this, Lugo, because we're going to be talking about Midway here in just a minute because of something that just popped up recently. In fact, I guess now that's as good a segue as any. These are some of the models that I made for my Midway video. And they've been sitting on the shelf or in drawers because they were quick and dirty builds. And I was going to point out a few things about them that you've probably already noticed besides the low quality of the Rush builds, because they were not close to the camera. I had to manipulate them a lot, so I couldn't have anything like antennas or pitot tube, stuff that would get knocked off easily. And I had them in various scales because these things I was hanging on wire threads in front of green screens and all this other stuff. And a lot of them I built as quick and fast as I could, bought them in bulk, and some of them were store-bought. And some of them, in fact, were actually kit bashes. And let me move these out of the way here. Now, for example, this biplane is supposed to be an E8N Dave, which I believe was an early Nakajima, but I couldn't find one. Now there's a kit, but there wasn't at the time. And so I made it a kit bash to Stearman. And I'm not even sure if I ever got around to using it in the movie or not. The strut braces for the pontoons are a ladder that I cut up, and I think the tip floats are carved out of bombs or something, using whatever I had. And of course, things got pretty busted up, just sitting in storage. Well, make sure, Lance, I say, make sure you have your tools, get your turnbuckles in place, make sure they're secured, and for heaven's sake, don't rush. These are a lot of the Japanese aircraft that now a couple of them, like the lower right, I bought the little gray one, but the rest of them I built, and they were, all of them were just made to go in front of the camera. Now the folded wing Kate, I didn't. The two smaller scale Kates I didn't get till after I was done. And yes, the Japanese did have a D4N Suzy at the battle, one or two of them. Let's see, and of course the American fleet. Now, one thing I wanted, now I did put some color into the, try to get the colors right and everything, but if you will notice. Right. Here, this is the one I want to show you. This TBD I wanted to show you this particular, and the Buffalo, I had to paint out the cockpits on them. Now, the Buffalo I just painted it black, and in the case of the TBD I frosted it because they were reflecting so much light that using the green screen it was virtually impossible. So as you can tell, and if you've ever seen an actual Hollywood model, they're often very, when you look at them up close, they're not particularly detailed. They look great on screen, but you look at them up close, you go, And because they only have to fool the camera, and the camera is not nearly as perceptive as the human eye. But the whole idea was simply to make them as non-reflective as possible and have as few protrusions as possible. Otherwise, stuff keeps getting knocked off of them. a lot of the stuff that I did, I wound up either only using stills of it or I didn't use it at all. I had zeros in about 4 different scales. And yeah, Stearman does. There's no way you're going to put it. You could, if anybody ever decides to make a movie about the life of Jimmy Doolittle, it's got to be a miniseries. They're going to need at least 8 hours. And hey, Edward, no worries at all. I was just talking about the SE5s a minute ago. Yeah, I actually had bought a 1/32 scale Czech Models Buffalo that I got about a third of the way through construction and realized an entire sprue was missing, an entire runner tree was missing, and so I either have, and it wound up stalling. It's still sitting on the shelf about 1/3 done. That's in the near future. At some point, hopefully we'll spend a week just getting these kits that have stalled finished, and that's actually that and the Vostok are the first 2 on the list. And by the way, the Czech Models, a 1/32 scale Buffalo from Czech Models, it is really an impressive kit in a lot of ways. First off, they give you a ton of extra parts so you can make several different variants. You can make the export variant, you make the Marine Corps variant, you can make the Finnish variant, complete with different propellers and different engines. They have every medium you can imagine. It's got film parts, it's got decals, it's got photo etch, it's got resin. I think it was some photo etch. There's resin, and it has 2 completely different cockpits depending on whether it's American or foreign export. So really a very capable kit. The cover art shows the Midway version, which is what I bought it for, and they have those decals, but they have decals for others also. So if you're looking to build a 1/32 scale Buffalo, I would recommend that Czech 1/32 scale kit. I got it used secondhand, and at first I wondered if maybe I had somehow lost, but no way I lost the entire runner. So it just wasn't in there, I suppose. And it could have been done at the factory. Stuff happens. So the reason I was getting back into the Midway stuff was, of course, I did a critique of the movie that was made some time ago, and the just recently Nick Hodges over at History Buffs, he has a YouTube channel where he talks about how accurate historically based movies are. And he just did his first of several installments on the movie Midway, which I had done a review of when I saw it back in 2019. Well, that apparently, because a lot of the same kind of people that watch this channel watch that channel, I've been getting a lot of questions lately about stuff at Midway. And the thing that at the same time, almost at the same time he released this, recently Bismarck over at Military Aviation Visualized, I think it's the name of the channel, had just done a video on the flight to nowhere. Now, for those who are not initiated, although the Americans had 3 aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway, realistically only 2 of them engaged in the fight because, at least for the main battle, because Hornets Air Group went flying off to the west. And except for the famous Torpedo Squadron 8 under Waldron, who changed course on their own initiative, and found the Japanese, unfortunately, were all shot down. But the 2 squadrons of bombers and the fighters they brought with them just flew out into open ocean. And when they turned around and came back, they got scattered. The fighters got lost, wound up running out of gas. All 10 of their escort fighters were lost to fuel exhaustion. 8 of the pilots were recovered over the next 4 days, floating around in their dinghies, but 2 of them, I think one was killed on the ditching and the other was just lost. His name was Markland, I believe. In fact, his family commissioned a investigation, I believe, after the war, and that's kind of become the unofficial Bible of what happened to the flight to nowhere. But the Sea Hag, the commander of Hornet Air Group, got relieved after the battle. He got beached. In fact, so did the captain of the ship, Mark Mitcher, and it took a while for Mitcher to get back out to sea because it was, and then after they, I hate to say it like this, but if they bungled it, the kind of went into CYA mode, and that only made matters worse. But no, you're right. The PBY does not get enough credit. We had it's been a while since I did the video on this. I think it was 32 PBYs. About half of them were amphibious. About half of them were straight float planes. Quick reminder: PBY-5 is a float plane. PBY-5A is an amphibian. Has less range because it has to carry that very heavy landing gear on it. But it was the Catalinas that found the Japanese several times, and people forget we lost one also. Not just the ones that were on the ground, but you had one that was shot down, and half of its crew were killed. And that's one of those little side battles. People completely lost in the. Then there's the 4 of them that went out and torpedoed. The only successful torpedo attack of the U.S. Navy at the Battle of Midway was done by a Catalina. Hit the Japanese oiler Akebono Maru and hit it in the forecastle towards the front of the ship, and it did kill 10 or 12 of the crew, but it didn't sink the ship, although it did have to retreat up back to Truk, and it cost them a fleet oiler. But that was they believe it was Ensign Gaylord Probst who fired the only successful torpedo, and that Mark 13 torpedo was horribly flawed. PBY, yes, PBY does stand for something actually. Patrol Bomber Consolidated. The Navy in those days, after up to the late 50s, early 60s, identified every aircraft with 1 or 2 letters, like PB as patrol bomber. Then the next letter would be the manufacturer, and Y was the letter that was consolidated. That's why you have so many F4s. You have the F4U Corsair, the F4F Wildcat. And the reason for that is F4U means fighter, 4th model we've adopted, and U was the designator for Chance Vought. So as our 4th fighter, just reading the nomenclature, you knew that it's the 4th fighter plane we bought from Chance Vought. F4F was the exact same thing, but F was the designator for Grumman. So 4th fighter we bought from Grumman. And, oh, by the way, they never used the 1. So the very first fighter plane that Grumman ever made for the U.S. Navy, which is a biplane, was like a little biplane Wildcat. Had a same little fuselage retracting landing gear. It's called the FF. That was its actual designation. Fighter Grumman. Then when they came up with an improved version, they went F2F. So the absence of a number tells you. That's why you had like the AD, the Sky Raider. Originally it was the AD. It was the first attack plane they bought from Douglas. They bought a lot of Douglas aircraft, but that was the first one that had the attack designation. And then in any number that follows it means it's a subsequent model. Like the AD4 would be the attack aircraft. Douglas-4 meant it's the 4th iteration of this airplane. But if the number came between the letters like A4D, then that meant that is the 4th attack aircraft type we bought from them. Confused yet? Because if you're not trying hard enough. The B-25 Mitchell was the PBJ. Patrol, Bomber, and J for North American, which is why it's the SNJ. Scout, Trainer. The Navy used N for Trainer. Scout, Trainer, North American, SNJ, which, of course, the Air Corps called the AT-6. And don't get me started on this rabbit hole. Lance, I remember that airplane. If you're going back to the late 60s, I remember seeing that Catalina parked out at Tallahassee Airport back when Tallahassee only had a single 5,000-foot runway. And actually, my dad, who was a passionate aviator, we actually went out and walked around it one day. I thought, my God, this thing was huge. Of course, I was only, that tall. But I actually saw one recently when I was down in Fort Lauderdale Executive. I put a little video up about the visit to the Wings Museum down at Fort Lauderdale Executive. And there was a PBY, and it wasn't a Canso with the big tall tail. It was an actual straight PBY-5A. The only modification was it had a square rudder on it, which is apparently a post-war mod. SB-42C-4, Scout Bomber, 2nd aircraft acquired from the Curtiss Air Force, Curtiss Aircraft Company, 4th iteration of this airplane. Scout Bomber, 2nd, Curtiss, 4th iteration. And they went all the way up, I think, to the Dash 5 on that airplane. The SBD went all the way up to the Dash 5 version. And the way to tell a Dash 5 at a glimpse is there's no carburetor intake on top of the scoop on top of the cowling. In fact, this would probably be a -5 because there's no carburetor air intake on the top of the cowling, if I remember correctly. I'm doing a lot of this from memory, so that's the old Hawk kit that was later. That particular one is a tester's kit, which is just the same thing. They bought all of Hawk's old stuff, and all that, of course, now belongs to Round 2. It's funny you mentioned that, Tabby, because when I was driving home the other day, I was talking to one of my buddies on the phone. We were chatting about the Catalina and the Martin Mariner, and I took my private pilot check ride from a retired Martin Mariner pilot. And a lot of people forget that the Mariners they were around in World War II. They actually saw that a kit of them's been released, shows them dropping depth charges or something, and the flying boats never really get the love. The reason everybody knows the Catalina is because it was in before the war, and it was there at places like Midway and all these other big battles, and it was prolific. It was used by so many allies. Because it had been in production a long time, it was a known quantity. But there were Mariners and Coronados and a lot of other flying boats around. And there were only a few companies that made them. Martin had made the M130 China Clipper, which gave them a lot of experience. They were made there at Martin State Airport, which is right on Baltimore Harbor. And I've been right to the ramp where they would roll them into the water after they built them. And the Martin products are so well thought of that the Japanese wound up basically making a turboprop copy of one of them, an amphibious version, that I think they're still flying as a patrol plane today. Of course, Consolidated made the Catalina, and they'd had a history of making them. And Boeing had made some, like the big 314. And of course, Hughes and the Spruce Goose. But Sikorsky had made them, but Sikorsky didn't really make the big ones, and he started moving towards helicopters. But that was the bulk of them. And yeah. The Helldiver was definitely not a beloved airplane like the barge, the SBD. And it had a lot of, first off, it was a very complicated airplane. It had a lot of electrical and hydraulic systems on it. And it just didn't have the nice handling characteristics. But if I remember correctly, it did have a longer range and was a faster airplane, could carry more. China Clipper calling Alameda. Yeah. But the flying boats are in a very different world to land-based aircraft. I mean, you have to be, always PBY scuba in the water. Yeah, that's become a class. That's probably the best remembered scene out of that whole movie, and it is really well photographed. But the flying boat guys, they really have to be a master of two completely different worlds. Both the water and the air. And it's not a both of these are acquired skills. I mean, I'm not float plane rated. I've thought about it, and to be honest, that's it. The Shinmiwa, the PS1, and I have to be honest. I'm a little intimidated of the idea of flying off the water. I don't have that much experience on boats, but okay, little history on Max here. When I was going to North Florida Christian School, 5th grade. I'm 11 years old, so that's about 1972. Very impressionable age. And there's this French amphibian called a Riviera. Looks kind of like a twin boom CB. Anyway, and it's at the Tallahassee Commercial Airport. And then one day I hear it crashed, and that one of the people in it was killed. Some guy was flying with his kid, and apparently he rolled it trying to put it on one of the lakes, and they'd fished it out. And I'd seen this airplane parked at the airport, at Tallahassee Commercial Airport, for a while. And then the idea it wasn't there anymore. It kind of stuck with me that landing on the water was dangerous. And my dad was building a float plane, I think it was a Skinner Sport or something, a little home built in our house. And he had to sell it because he just had too many things going on. So he sold it about half done. But it really kind of stuck in my head that flying off the water could be tricky. And that's always kind of inclined me to keep it at arm's length. Which is, I know it's being unfair because the float plane guys I know absolutely love it. They don't want to fly anything else, and I'm sure it's just in my own mind. But you do have to be good on the water as well as in the air. Max, what plane would you want? Just one. Well, that would depend on the mission, but if somebody offered me an airplane just right now, said, okay, you can have any airplane you want, I'd be inclined to go with a Cessna Bird Dog. It's a fun airplane, not a great traveling airplane. It's slow, it drinks a lot of gas, but it's just a really fun airplane. And you can paint up military colors and have your little poor man's warbird, and they were actually combat veterans. Also, another option would be like the Piper Super Cruiser. It's got the wide back seat. That's another with a bigger engine. That's another really popular plane. But it would depend on the mission. But I guess if somebody just said one, I'd probably go with the Bird Dog. Everyone I know who's flown that airplane just said it's a hoot to fly. And it's just not fast. And with that big engine, they drink a little bit of gas because they're made to get off short field, but you can throttle back. But I have yet to see anybody that's flown that airplane that didn't just love it. I built the Kingfisher when I was a kid, long time ago. That actually would make a nice build. 148 scale Grumman flying boat. Yeah. Yeah, the Catalinas, they're definitely barking at you. World War II airplane. If I could have a World War II airplane, anyone? Well, if cost wasn't an issue, I'd probably go with a Mosquito. Just because it's a Mosquito, and I think that's just the coolest airplane. But on what I make, if somebody said I wouldn't mind an old BT-13, the Volti vibrator. You kind of get that cool World War II fighter plane vibe on about a quarter of the cost. Wouldn't mind a T6 either. I was listening to T6 fly by the other day though, and they're still, I'd forgotten just how loud those things were. But let's see. I actually knew somebody had a T6 in parts, and they were looking to sell it. And that's back when they ran about $45,000. I think he was wondered about, but he was planning to rebuild it, and it was complete. But I remember when you could get one for about $45,000, and a BT-13, you sort of get that AT6 SNJ vibe, but on a lower budget, because by then the T6s were running $80,000. But the BT-13 had the advantage that it was, since it has a fixed landing gear and a smaller engine, it was a little cheaper to operate. One of my dad's best friends, who had flown B-25s in World War II, was telling me the problem with the one thing he was warned about the BT-13, and it probably wasn't the only one like this, was that they'd lost a couple of them, student pilots trying to go around in a hurry. And he said the instructor took him up to altitude about 3,500 feet and said, okay, once you put it in landing configuration, so he gets the flaps down, has the throttle set, has the speed set, he goes, now I want you to just firewall the engine. And he just boom, pushed the throttle to the wall. That radial engine bark came to life, and it just rolled on him. Just torque rolled. And he goes, get the point, he goes, yes, sir. So if you have to go around, you ease that power in. Let that rudder become effective. Yeah, the Corsair would definitely be one. If I was going to have a fighter plane, Corsair would be a good one, and the Instant Eliminator. But I also really would like the Thunderbolt. I've always had a thing for Thunderbolts. If I was going to have a foreign aircraft, I'd probably want, I'd love a Focke-Wulf 190. Because like most pilots, I'd be scared to fly the 109 with that narrow landing gear. But the one airplane that there's really none of, there's actually two airplanes that if somebody says, okay, you can have any World War II airplane, from a collector standpoint, two of them that have always intrigued me. One is the Stuka, and there's none flying, and the other is the Japanese Val dive bomber. I've just thought, those were, they kind of have that Rocketeer classic spatted landing gear charm of the late 30s, yet they were World War II aircraft, and pretty good ones at what they did. And since there's no flying examples of either one, you'd have the only one on the block. There's actually somebody rebuilding a P-61 right now. They've been working on it for years, of course, but they may have it getting near ready to fly. Well, there's so many cool airplanes. And a Douglas A-20. That's a cool plane. But yeah, Saturday I said the Mosquito would have been my first choice off the bat. And yeah, man, you go on all day with this one. The Mossy just has a certain je ne sais quoi. It's hard to peg down, but I think part of the fact that it's made out of wood, which is one reason it's hard to get one to last very long. Same reason the PT boats aren't around except for a handful of museums. You guys probably know this, but at the end of the war, the United States Navy deliberately torched all of its PT boats, or at least most of them. I've actually seen pictures of, make you weep. But the Navy's attitude was, these are brown water Navy ships, okay? It's a huge amount of money to take them all the way back to the United States, plus we have no mission for them now. Because they're wood, they're difficult and expensive to maintain and keep going, and we don't want them to fall in the wrong hands, so it's best just to torch the things. And that's what they did. Well, Glacier Girl, yeah, she was a recovery, but I think they used most of her parts just for patterns because she was pretty thoroughly crushed. I don't know how much of the actual airplane's really in there. But it's impressive what they did. Yeah, P40E, that's a good one. Well, speaking of time, I was going to mention something to you guys. The danger of, I wouldn't mind having an SBD either, for that matter. The old bar. I would love to have a Devastator just because there's none of them around. So I walked, you guys may remember that yesterday I worked on these models. And I'm sorry, there's the picture from yesterday. Tinker with these. I went into the Tarbes today, and all I was going to do was take those pictures of my Midway models for today's live stream. That was it. Just going to take a couple of pictures, and these things are sitting there looking at me, and they're like, "Hey, kid, want to put a little paint on me? Want to paint your models? Just take a minute. Come on, you got nothing important to do." And then an hour later, I am neck deep in working on these things, and I've got to go do the live stream. How did this happen? And so you have to be careful anytime you start wandering around where your models are at, or you build your models, because you're very likely to end up getting involved in, oh, you know what? I'm just going to put this one little part on. Just gonna, just take a second to glue this antenna on, or stick this prop on, or, as long as I'm here, I guess a little paint touch that up wouldn't hurt. Oh, well, you know what? This part can go on to. And the next thing you know, when models talk, that's pretty much it. Oh, am I? Okay. I tell you what, I keep sliding away from this thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So, sorry, I get comfortable saying, stay by the microphone. Stay. Steady, lad. Steady. Hold the line. Oh, that's great. They might have been built in, some of them might have been built in Louisiana. That didn't shock me. All the Higgins boats were built in Louisiana. That's where Higgins had his factory. And just one touch. Hankel 100. Now, that's an airplane that had potential, but they did use it for. Well, they still made about 100 of them, I think. There's actually a P-39, or is it a P-63 King Cobra down here in Lakeland that I saw. And the only thing about that airplane is, I didn't get in it myself, but it's got a super tight cockpit. And I've been in a Mustang. That KI-84, that'd be a good one. KI-109 would be kind of that. That's basically the Peggy bomber, but without all the bomber stuff on it. Kind of turned into a high-speed transport. I have a model of one, that's one of those kits by LS. That was something else we were going to talk about. It has clear engine nacelles and clear fuselage halves. Also regular ones. So you can build it as a regular kit, or you can use these clear ones. And there's not enough parts there to make two models, but I was thinking what I might do is build the model and put since you can't usually see the interior on those kits anyways, put the entire interior inside the clear one, and then just build the model itself as a regular one without an interior in it. But try to sort of sneak in a 2-for-1 there. Thanks for radio. That's me, baby. But so I did get a little bit of work done on the models today. I seem to be down on the fuselage of the lag is a white decal that says C-13, and that's apparently the number. I have no idea where that decal snuck off to. And I probably got something in my spares I can make something out of. That's really about all I need to finish that model. A few little touch-ups of paint and stuff. But I got to give KP credit. The canopy doesn't fit very well, but that's really my only complaint with the model. And it's really a very poorly fitting canopy, and a file will, in a little bit of time, will probably take care of that. But then I'm afraid it's going to sit too low. Probably better off using filler. But the canopy really does not fit properly. If you look straight down on the top, you can tell that the cockpit area, the canopy is just a little too narrow and not quite deep enough. But that's really, again, my only complaint with it. And you know what? I have a bunch of those vacuform canopies that were sent to me. I should buy the Falcon ones, and I should probably. I bet I got something in there that might work. Alrighty then, let's see, what do we got next? You guys might recall, I got a lot of questions about this. I'm sure I have bored the crap out of everybody with this, but apparently I stumbled across this and it got a lot of attention. And yes, I did a little research, and some of you already knew this. Apparently, Curtiss Aircraft in the United States was contracted to make an American copy of the SE5A, which later, once it got in production, was known as the SE5E. And they did make, I caught some different numbers. One said 38 and one said 50. It might have been, I think it might have been, oh wait, I'm getting my numbers confused. It was 38 SE5As that were given to the Americans, and the Americans did operate one squadron of British-built SE5As. I believe it was 50 SE5Es that Curtiss made, stateside. They were supposed to go to France, but the war ended. And the SE5E became, they decided to use it as a fighter trainer. Of course, it never saw combat in American markings. By the way, that airplane was a rollover. For some reason, the stars on the bottom are backwards with the star pointing to the rear. But the E model is just a license-built copy, and we used them for several years. So the SE5 actually was made in America and was part of the, back then I guess it would have been the Army Air Service for a while. So that generated, so when I get those other SE5s, I'll probably put one in British markings and one in American markings. What I have not found yet is the Revell kit comes with an option of a 4-bladed prop, and it even includes a spinner. And I haven't been able to find a picture or any information on the 4-bladed prop SE5, what the story was on that, or which ones had the spinner. And that one doesn't have a spinner, so I don't think it was the American thing. But anyway, that was just kind of a neat little historical tidbit, because as much as I know about airplanes, I don't think I ever knew that the Americans built or had our own. Nope. We did not have an Air Force. We had the Air Service, which later became the Air Corps, and didn't become the and then it became the United States Army Air Force, and then it became the United States Air Force in 47, 48. My dad was actually in. We have his old Ike jacket, which is brown with Army stripes on it. And shortly after he went in, it went to Air Force, and he got his blues. But that was, and I believe, and they had the same, they just made Space Force here in the U.S., which is its own branch of service now. And that was a real tough thing for a lot of, we were like the last country to develop an independent Air Force. The Royal Air Force, which was originally the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Navy Flying Corps, and they combined to become the Royal Air Force. So the Royal Air Force is made of both ex-Army and naval officers. The Germans had the Imperial Air Service, which became the Luftwaffe. The Italians had, actually just about everybody had an Air Force before the United States did, but I think a lot of it had to do with, people talk about how conservative the generals of the era were. I don't think that was it. I think it's they just didn't want to lose the funding, and if they become their own independent service, we won't be able to control them, and we'll be a smaller service and that kind of thing. And Fleet Air Arm, thank you, Fleet Air Arm. The Fleet Air Arm and the Royal Flying Corps combined to become the Royal Air Force, and it's funny. Every single Air Force and Air Corps of that era did something right and did something wrong. And of course, we have the advantage of hindsight to look back and see what these things were. But the Germans had the better small unit tactics with their swarm formation versus the British Vic. The Brits were using radar very heavily, and we had the best weapons for a long time with the 650 caliber machine guns. And what about the IAF? Did it join RAF? IAF? I'm not sure which force that was. And the one thing the Japanese did better than anybody else, which was really more of a naval air arm thing, was the Japanese were the masters, at least in the early war, of coordinated multi-aircraft carrier task forces. Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, Midway, they did an incredibly good job. They had that down to a science. You realize when they sent their bombers off to attack Midway, they got, I think it was 109 airplanes in the air, formed up and on their way in 9 minutes. That's how proficient they were. Whereas us, it took an hour just for the Hornet to get all of its airplanes in the air. And then thanks to Ring, they flew over in parade formation, as it was called. That was kind of the thing I was going to get at. I'm talking about Midway. You guys, I know I harp on a lot. It's kind of become one of my subjects. But the thing about Midway, there is a controversial character. That was Commander Stanhope Cotton Ring. And he was the commander of the air group, or SEHAG, for the Hornet. And he had, I like to be careful. I talk about people who served back then, but he had his way of doing things. It was very much a disciplinarian, and he had, according to Parshall's book, he had been the British naval attaché, had picked up the habit of carrying a riding crop, a very Colonel Clink. And I've listened to veterans talk about him. I'm going to tell you, to this day, the few that are still around did not have a real high opinion. And he was apparently a mediocre aviator. And when Admiral Mitcher got the idea, hey, let's send the planes off westbound, because remember, the Americans had only sighted 2 carriers, and we knew there were 4. So they didn't know where the other 2 were. The Japanese normally worked in 2 aircraft carrier groups about 50 miles apart. So they figured, well, the other group's probably trailing about 50 miles behind. Let's go look for them. And turned out this time the Japanese kept all their carriers together just due to the weather and everything. We'd only seen 2 of them. And I've actually seen an interview with the co-pilot of the PBY that spotted them. And Nimitz was, understandably, every time they'd send a report, the only answer they got back was amplify. Means we need more information. They're ducking in and out of the clouds to keep from getting shot down, because you're not going to relay any information if you get yourself killed. And the report what they have, but given the haze and low altitude they had to fly out because of the cloud cover, they only saw 2 carriers. So Mitcher's thought process was perfectly sound. It just happened to be wrong. It got real ugly after the battle. Anyway, the entire flight to nowhere takes place. The entire Hornet Air Group winds up going on about a 265 westerly heading when they should be heading southwest. and they're going to miss the Japanese by 50, 60 miles easy. And they're not far off the ship for Waldron and Torpedo 8. He knows they're making a mistake, and he knows where they've got verified targets. He just tells us, he breaks radio silence and tells Ring that they're going the wrong way. Let's change 30 to 40 degrees left. And Ring pulls rank, not going to do it. Stay in a position, follow us. Waldron's like, screw that. He waggles his wings, waves to his pilot, and they go off and fly into history. They did find the Japanese, unfortunately, without any fighter escort. The fighters and 2 squadrons of bombers, the scouting squadron and the bombing squadron, all track off, and over time, Ring's command just disintegrates. The fighters are running out of gas. A couple of the pilots are waggling their wings at the flight at the fighter element commander, and he's like, get back in formation. Like, we're running out of fuel. So onesies and twosies, they all just turn back on their own as they start passing the point of no return. And eventually all the fighters are stripped away. And then the same thing starts happening with the bombing squadron, then with the scouting squadron. Eventually Ring finds himself up there by himself flying west into open ocean. Now here's the part that just is mind-boggling. Everybody's worried about fuel. Ring turns around, overtakes. I mean, he's got to be flying full throttle. He overtakes the aircraft that had already turned around, and he's the first one back to the ship. How he did that without running out of fuel? He must have had that thing lean back to the cylinder head temperatures or overheating. And I'm not sure if it's customary, but I know it's customary, but I think it might actually be regulation that the air group commander report immediately to the captain, and he didn't. He went straight off to his cabin and started writing up his report, which, i.e., his excuse. When he landed, nobody noticed that the bomb was still strapped to the airplane. So they're all cheering. They all think, oh, you went and hit the Japanese. Nope. Never found them. And only about 20 of his planes, all the fighters were lost to fuel starvation. They missed the fleet. And they all wound up running out of gas. So about 20 of the airplanes made it back to Hornet. And the rest of a bunch of the others diverted to Midway. And some of them ran out of gas or had engine trouble on the way, so a couple more planes dropped out of the sky. All the torpedo planes are shot down. They had not so much as scratched the paint on the Japanese fleet. Not one piece of ordnance hit target. And it was the flight to nowhere. It was an unmitigated disaster. But the other 2 ships, Yorktown, which had the most experienced air groups with guys like Lem Massey and of course the famous Jimmy Thatch, they managed to get the job done. If Hornet's air group had been there, maybe we would have got all 4 carriers in the first fight, but they went back and got the 4th one later. And a couple of now Hornet's people, its air group did help bomb Makuma and Magami a couple of days later, but Ring did not go on those missions. They only sent 3 torpedo planes because that's all they could muster, and those are other spares. And the Battle of Midway was a near-run thing. It was a combination of good luck and gall, and some very competent subordinates. People like Dick Best and these lieutenant and lieutenant commander grade rank guys who are on the scene were able to, Walt Rodee and these others, they were able to go in there and just and drive in and make it happen. You realize the entire Battle of Midway, which is the most important single American battle in the Pacific, that stopped it did contrary to what people say, it did not reverse the tide of the war, but it did stop the Japanese advance. There were probably less than a dozen bombs that actually, the 4 of them hit the Hiryu. I think 3 of them hit one hit Akagi. One bomb did Akagi in, although the one that went in the water jammed the rudder, so we'll count that because the ship could only steer in a circle, which greatly affected their firefighting. I think 3 hit Soryu and 3 or 4 hit Kaga. So, dozen bombs, all of that for a dozen bombs that did all the real damage. And that's yeah, he's talking about when the SBDs went to where the Japanese fleet had turned. So when the air group from Enterprise got there, was it Wade McCluskey? When they got there, there were no Japanese to be seen. But the submarine Nautilus had shot a torpedo at the battleship, I think it was Haruna. And so they sent a destroyer to go deal with the submarine problem. And that destroyer, and the name escapes me right now. Anyway, that destroyer spent about an hour running around trying to destroy the American sub. Pretty much spent its complement of depth charges. Once they were convinced that the sub was either sunk or no longer a threat, they go hauling butt to the join up with the fleet. Well, the American airplanes show up and there's no fleet. But somebody knows, hey, look over there. There's a destroyer, and he's cutting awake. I mean, like a big arrowhead in the water. It didn't take a genius to figure out he's going back to rejoin the fleet, so they just extrapolated his course, and it took him right to the fleet. And all because of a torpedo that didn't even hit its target. But it's arguably the single most important torpedo the Americans fired during the battle. And the idea that the ships from Yorktown and Hornet or Enterprise showed up at the same time, that was just dumb luck. The only group that really nailed it was the group from the Yorktown. Now, of course, they were the most experienced. And one of the things they did that saved a lot of time. Well, where's Halsey, the World Wonders? That was later on. That was after he gotten suckered into chasing. That was the Battle of Leyte Gulf, I think, where he got suckered into chasing a fleet, an aircraft carrier that virtually had no aircraft. But when the guys from Yorktown took off, they did a running departure. They didn't orbit and form in flight. First plane off, turned on course and started climbing. Next plane off just followed him, and every plane takes off and turns straight on course. And the idea is that, the fighters can throttle back and the dive bombers can throttle back so the torpedo planes can catch up. But the idea was you're not wasting fuel, you're making time. And they basically formed up en route. And as a result, they saved a lot of fuel. Whereas the Hornet was the exact opposite. Ring had them circling until everybody was in formation. They literally flew over the fleet in parade formation on their way. The fighters had burned off an hour of fuel, and they had the shortest range of any of them. And I don't think I've seen pictures of them getting ready to take off, and I don't recall seeing drop tanks on the planes. But the importance of the battle was that with those four carriers gone, the Japanese had lost a great deal of their force projection capability. Now, a lot of people say, but they still had all their battleships, and they did. And believe me, when the Guadalcanal campaign took off, those battleships made themselves felt. Battle of Iron Bottom Sound, not to mention the constant harassment of the Marines at Guadalcanal in Henderson Field. So, why aren't the battleships a bigger deal than they are? Okay, this is what it all boils down to. Remember I said that the entire Chap fleet was brought down by basically 11 or 12 bomb strikes. This is what people lose focus on. Now, all of us, we build models. We love the things, the cars, the planes, the trucks, the rockets. We're really intrigued by the stuff. Not so much by the mission of the stuff. We like to build battleships because they're beautiful. We like to build sailing ships because they're beautiful. We like to build fighters because they're sleek. So on and so forth. But what is the mission? The military's mission primarily, as the chieftain likes to say, is steel on target. That's what matters. Everybody looks at an aircraft carrier, and as much as I love aircraft carriers, they are never going to win any beauty contests. It's a big, flat, ugly ship because it's not really a fighting ship in the true sense. Aircraft carrier is an airport. It's steel on target. Battleships are mighty and powerful, but they've only got a 20-odd mile range on those guns and only a certain degree of accuracy. Aircraft carrier sends aircraft that have 200, 300, and of course I'm using World War II numbers, but 200 or 300 miles of range. They can be adjusted in flight if the enemy is sighted, which, by the way, did happen at Coral Sea. And a bunch of other, but it happened in Midway. The dive bomber and torpedo planes and fighters, the fighters, of course, just have the job of protecting the bombers. The dive bombers and torpedo planes, they're the truly valuable asset on the aircraft carrier because of their ability to get that 800-pound warhead to connect with the enemy target. If 2 squadrons of dive bombers only put 2 or 3 bombs on the target, and that's often the way it worked out, the simple reality is that that's more steel on target than a battleship is going to do from 300 miles away. And you have a human driving the thing, so you have some sort of aiming mechanism. It's not a random shot. And it can be called back at up to the last second. So a lot of the old battleship admirals had trouble, and this, by the way, this was in all the navies. There was always the big gun club versus the air deals. And this was a big ongoing thing, but the simple fact is that your job is to put steel on target. And airplanes with the 234, in the case of Japanese, 500-mile range, and a well-trained crew are going to be far more effective at that. And they do it while the really expensive asset, the ship, is hopefully safely out of range. And this is, some of these guys couldn't wrap their head around the idea that their big gun club was as vulnerable as it was and wasn't the queen of battle like it used to be. Between Pearl Harbor and the Prince of Wales and Repulse being sunk, and not to mention the additional ships that the British lost was in the Indian Ocean after they'd moved to Ceylon, the airplane had pretty much proved that, yeah, the battleship's a thing of the past. It's great for it's wonderful for shell bombardment, shore bombardment, softening up and that kind of thing. It's great. And it still had a place, but that place was waning. And now with modern ordnance, with everything being laser so super accurate and capable of amazing penetration, you can put all the steel you want on a battleship, it's not going to survive some of the modern weapons. So as beautiful as they are, as impressive as they are a thing of the past. And they were actually a thing of the past largely in World War II, but you just couldn't convince people of that. And but the war proved it. It's about force projection. And Fachita himself had said, he who rules the air rules the sea. He who rules the sea rules the world. And for a while, that title belonged to the Imperial Japanese Navy. Yeah, Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors. You want to see one you want to read a book that will tick you off. Read, was it Tin Fish and Iron Men, about the torpedo debacle. And we could go on that all day. Good God, bad fusing mechanisms. They didn't understand why the magnetic stuff wouldn't work because they didn't know about isogonic lines and the changes in magnetic variation and test. You realize that the United States Navy had only fired 2 torpedoes to test whether was it the Mark 14 torpedo we were using was working, or Mark 15. They only fired 2, and one of them missed. And they said, good enough. Okay, Needham, glad you're able to make it. Now, there was another thing. Where did I put that picture? Oh yeah, real quick before I forget. Guys, this is a YouTube channel, Moss6510. This is a young fellow that's got a model building channel you might like to check out. I just happened to stumble onto him doing a vintage Revell SE5 build, but some pretty cool animations at the beginning, but you guys might like to check it out. He's another one of us, but he's a younger fellow, and glad to see young people doing this stuff. And he's I think you might find it interesting, and he goes through some of the old kits and everything. So that's Moss 6510. So I think you guys might want to check out one of his. I found it entertaining channel. And there was, here it is, Bison. Okay, you guys remember this, the Bison. We talked about this a fair bit. I got an email from Tom Daniel, and I thought I would share it with you a little bit. Okay, I just clicked away from, here we go. TD was telling me just a couple of extended notes. His design and engineering premise for the turbine motor, which was, by the way, supposed to be able to use the gas or bunker C oil as diesel powered, and so this would have been a multi-fuel vehicle. It says the idea would be contained in interchangeable pods for ease of maintenance. So that whole pod with the engines on top and everything, you grant access and probably could be replaced fairly easily. So that was, aside from looking cool, it actually served a real function. That's one of the things TD always points out, is designs had to be functional. And it says it looks at the dromedary steering was built into this one. And I'm not sure. I think dromedary steering means all four wheels turn. I looked it up and couldn't really, said that a gentleman named Judd Holcomb made some neat freehand engineering drawings, but unfortunately TD doesn't have the copies, nor his original 4-view of the interior mock-up and drawing. But he says, I had not even considered a name at the time, back in 1959. Now, this thing was being designed in 1959. So, I mean, these guys really were engineering the future. Hey, look at that. I mean, it really looks like it belongs on the set of UFO or Star Wars. But anyway, he says the Bison name was no doubt added by the late Mike Lathers, who was one of the original 2 advanced truck studio designers, the other being Bob Larson. TD was the third man in the advanced truck design. Prior to my employment at Styling, Lathers had used the name Bison on his own designs in progress. He thinks that after his leave of absence at GM to return to the West Coast and for family reasons, and then he got, of course, his activation to VS-772 in the Navy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He says that Mike most likely produced the 1-to-1 mock-up as directed by Mitchell and or Chuck Jordan. Pretty zoomy looking for 1959, huh? So that was the email I got about the Bison from TD. And it's just so nice to be able to get this kind of rare information on these things that happened. They just for the folks that are who were there. I actually recently watched that one by Drachenfell about the bad torpedoes. The thing about there was, I forget, was it Lockwood? Which one? One of the admirals who had been involved in Bureau of Ordnance tests and everything, and I don't know if it was just arrogance or just trying to protect his career, his image, or if he truly believed it. But he was adamant that there was nothing wrong with the computers, or with the torpedoes, and I mean they were just about to have a mutiny on their hands after a while. The sub skippers were understandably infuriated, and there's one case I read where a sub skipper was so mad he went to where there was an underwater cliff and fired like his entire complement of torpedoes, and not one of the bloody things detonated. And one of the reasons for this was the Mark 14 torpedo was much heavier than the preceding Mark 12 or Mark 10. I think it was Mark 12, but they used the same firing pin. And what was happening was it's a pin and a tube, and to save weight, I think on an aluminum pin and aluminum tube. But what had happened was the new torpedo was so much heavier that when it would hit, the tube would bend, so the firing mechanism couldn't hit the detonator. That was one problem. So that's a lot of skippers learned that they could hit about a 30-degree angle to the target, which is a tricky shot. They had a pretty good chance of detonating. But then you had to actually hit the ship. The magnetic influence detonator was having all kinds of problems. It turned out one thing was running too deep. because when they fired the original test torpedoes, they loaded them with concrete, but it didn't weigh as much as Torpex. So they made all those adjustments. So when they loaded them with the Torpex, they actually were running like 11 feet deeper than they were supposed to. And when you're dealing with, you know, a very sensitive magnetic field to make the thing go boom, that 11 feet was enough that just nothing happened. Or they would go off prematurely, or they go off after they passed the ship. And so that was another thing that had to be taken care of. Over time, by late 43, they had it worked out. In 44, the kills skyrocketed. But the idea of, your sub commanders don't know how to shoot their torpedoes. I mean, look, I can understand if it's 1 or 2 incidents, maybe 3. But when every sub skipper out there, no. We need to start looking at the common denominator here. Oh, yes, Big Weed, yep. He did. That's actually not a bad one. It's also one of the first movies where John Wayne took off his toupee. Towards the end, you see him, he's balding. He let his rule, yes, the Duke wore a toupee, I'm sorry to say. Now, let's see here. Barry asked if I thought about sewing needles clipped near the eyelet using a small tool that pushed the thread into the needle. I have. I actually considered that. I've also, he says, I've repaired glue prints by painting small squares over it and making them look like actual fabric repair. That is what I've been doing for a long time to cover my glue smears. Planes beat battleship because steel on target. I already talked about that. But anyway, I did consider using a clipping off needles. I found that needles tend to make a somewhat harder steel and often have a polished surface, which can be a little tricky to glue into place. But I do believe that there's a potential that could work. But there's so many with things like eye pins and the gas patch turnbuckles and everything. I just never have gotten around to it. Plus, I have to buy a lot of needles, which I seem to never have for some reason. Let's see. Did I have any other notes? That was all that. So, I'm going to have to get 1 or 2 of these kits also to go with the SE5 now that I have the SE5. Well, that's what I have, guys. What do you got? Not a wig, Claire. A toupee. Which apparently a lot of actors, even those who are known for their hair, are wearing toupees. But, you know, it's an image-conscious industry, so what you look like is what you get judged by. Take care, model man. Nice seeing you. I'm glad you could make it. Ooh. Just reading comments here. Yes, his real name was Marion Morrison. And 1 or 2 times he was billed that way. Oh, by the way, speaking of the Duke, okay, Kenneth, glad you can make it, man. There's my wife and I just watched 2 John Wayne movies fairly back to back. It was probably his greatest movie, The Searchers, and also She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. I didn't realize those were both. I forget it was written by Marion C. Cooper. And for those who don't recall, Marion C. Cooper is famous for being the person who gave us King Kong. And so he actually, apparently Cooper took a nap one day and had this dream about a 25-foot gorilla running amok in New York, and that gave him the idea, and he wrote King Kong from that. He was also involved with that Duke. He was also a World War I aviator, who, if I'm not mistaken, I believe little Miss Honey is meowing away. I think she wants some attention. Yeah, The Searchers is, in my humble opinion, The Searchers is actually the Duke's best movie. My favorite movies of his, The Searchers, War Yellow Ribbon, True Grit, and The Shootist would be at the top of the list. And no, I didn't make it down to Top Gun. Yeah, the little needle threaders. I don't. They could probably work with something like with a slightly larger, but I don't know. I didn't try one on the gas patch. That hole's so tiny. I'm not sure they could get in there. I did manage to thread a few of them eventually. Also found that little fishing line I use goes in there real nicely, but that stuff won't. It always curves coming out of the because it's not as flexible as thread. Of course, I could get some lighter fishing line that might do that too, though. Wake of the Red Witch. That's one of the few. It's one of the few movies he dies in, I think. Yes, the Gallon Hours. That's a great one. That's she here, a Cagney, right, playing Halsey in that one. I think he even looked like Halsey. A lot of top entries at Top Gun this year. Oh, okay. Thank you. I'm gonna have to look that up then. I can find a picture of McCudden's airplane. We actually have at my company headquarters. They actually have a two-bladed SE5A prop up with a plaque on it that says, this prop flew in the First World War. I don't know how they got that, but if that thing ever goes disappearing, don't look at my house. Model Palooza. No, I haven't. I have to check that out. Yeah, the John Ford Cavalry trilogy. I think the other was Fort Apache, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and I'm sure there's another. I was telling my wife that the vistas you look at the background, to this day people say, oh, that movie looked like a John Ford Western because of his, he had that thing for the. Oh, I didn't know he'd met Wyatt Earp. That's interesting. Yeah, I've got the High and the Mighty and Island in the Sky on the DVD set, and they weren't released for a long time by the Wayne family for some reason. I don't know why. Both good movies. I mean, one's a bit of a soap opera, but still a good movie. We use a little snippet where he slaps the captain in our CRM training classes. Guys, if I happen to make it to one of these things at Model Palooza or something, you see me, come up and let me know who you are, because you guys all know what I look like. I don't know what y'all look like. So come up, make sure to come up and say hi. I bumped into a couple of people who watch the channel here locally. The building inspector was one, and he's actually head of the local IMPS or MPC, or he was, IPMS. And he's also a really good building inspector. And I've got his card here somewhere. I need to touch base with him. Yeah, Aces High. That was Aces High was, believe it or not, was actually made on a fairly tight budget. But when they were making it, they actually were running I ran an article in, I think it was Flying Magazine, about it, and the Blue Max would probably be my favorite of the First World War flying movies. That was my dad's favorite. They were just really good flying scenes. And after it was made, those airplanes went into, I think it was Lynn Garrison had them, and they were in Ireland is where they filmed that. That's how they made Richthofen versus Brown a few years later, because they had airplanes sitting around not doing anything. And movies like Aces High, I think, were also able to use the same planes. That Fowls that they made for the movie, I think, is in New Zealand. And one of the D7s, I think, is still flying. They said it actually didn't fly that well because they didn't make the wing right or something. And they were made in different places. Like one was made in France, and there's this. Unfortunately, that company in New Zealand that Peter Jackson had, you guys are probably familiar with the skullduggery behind that. It went out of business. It's a pity because they really made some very accurate aircraft. Kermit Weeks has got at least one of them. I think probably more. But oh, thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. Yep, Sons of Iwo Jima, and let's see. Oh, thank you. Yeah, the Fighting CBs. No, not the Army Corps of Engineers. James Arness and them. You guys know that James Arness also played The Thing in the movie The Thing. And that's right, those guys were stuck there in the middle of the Alaskan North Pole with a creature that turned out to be Matt Dillon. Yeah, well, RoboTube, if I talked about this before, if what I have heard is correct, the disaster with that company is one of the reasons that Wingnut Wings went away. And this guy that was the source of the problem had been over at Rhinebeck for a while. And there's no question, he's probably one of the most knowledgeable people in the world on World War I aircraft, and he could fly the wings off of them. He was absolutely capable of doing that, but it was his other shenanigans that... yeah. Okay, how many of you guys saw Leonard Nimoy in Radar Men from the Moon? And anytime at one of the Star Trek conventions, people would ask you about that. Guys, I was a new actor. I needed a job. Yeah, you don't have to explain yourself. Yep, he was the original Thing. By the way, I was told, and I don't think this is a spoiler, if you guys have seen The Hateful Eight, apparently that was the general idea was inspired by The Thing. And when I was told that, I looked at the story, I went, oh, okay, yeah, I see that. Knowledgeable but crooked as the day is long. Yeah, I would say that's a fair assessment. That pretty much sums it up. It's a pity, too, because his pilfering and chicanery, cost us what I think was, in many ways, I can't call it a national treasure. It's more like an international treasure, because I don't think anybody else is doing what they were doing or is even capable of it. I suppose in the long run, there's, other than people like us who just find the things interesting, losing a company that remanufactures vintage biplanes isn't exactly a, dilemma for the whole world, but it's just such a shame. I'd love to have, or to fly one of those biplanes. At my size, I probably couldn't fit in one of them. I saw Kermit getting in the D7 when it was under some kind of rebuild or something, and I've met Kermit, and he's a grown man, but he's not anywhere near my size. And I was like, he fills it up. And as that last live stream, I found that interview with that RAF pilot, and he was talking, how tiny the guys were back then. They're flying gear at their size because it's made for guys their size. I've flown a Stearman. I can barely fit in a Stearman. It's got a considerably more spacious cockpit. Yeah, Cooper flew the Albatross. Yeah, that's right. And because some of those guys stayed over, him and Schrodeshak, who was, I think, his director of photography, had also been like a photographer on an aerial reconnaissance plane, and one of them had been captured by was some group in one of the post-war battles. I forget if it was a Whites versus the Reds or which one it was. People forget about all these little ancillary wars that took place after the First World War, and it's hard to keep because the First World War redrew the world map. It was truly the end of empire, the end of monarchies, and borders were shifting, and there were all kinds of little wars breaking out. And there's no end of things you can model if you can find the resources on them, because a lot of them use surplus World War One equipment. So there were still these Rolands and Fowleses and Fokkers and other things that were out there flying around. I think it said the British gave 35 SE5s to the Australians. Not that they were involved in any of that mess, but it's just like, it just shows how equipment was moving all over the world. And the same thing happened after World War II. Heck, there's one or two countries that are still using Chaffee tanks from the Second World War. I think Peru still has some of them. There's one other country. Hey, 75 millimeter gun's a 75 millimeter gun. You know, as long as you're not taking on a T-55 or something. Well, you know, it's John Ashley. The Sand Pebbles. Some people think that was McQueen's best movie. It's the only time he was ever nominated for an Academy Award, and he didn't win, but at least he was nominated. And a lot of people. I mean, I'm talking about a lot of old salts who had served in the China Sea and everything. I mean, in China and the Navy and stuff. An old Marine said he looked and acted just like a man of that period. It helped that he had been a Marine, but he had that destroyer man swagger. And of course, his time in the Corps and everything, he was very comfortable handling weapons, which is evident by the way he did. That was when I was a kid. I saw the movie. It was a little hard for me to catch what was going on because the whole romantic subplot got right past me. I didn't begin to understand the politics. But I look at it now and I realize what a fantastic movie The Sand Pebbles is. A terribly sad ending, unfortunately. But the of course, they shot that movie, I think, in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and they had their problems. It took about 8 months to shoot that movie. It was supposed to take 3, and it tripled the budget, went triple what it was supposed to. They built that ship for the movie, but the movie was like the number 6 grossing film of that year, and still stands out as one of the classics. And one of the things that makes it interesting is the time period. 20s China. I mean, except for Charlton Heston and the Boxers, which I think took place before all that, but you just don't see many movies about that part of the world. And it was an interesting subject matter, and I think you're right. It's one of McQueen's best movies, and I think he did Bullet shortly thereafter, so he was on a winning streak. Well, DeForest Kelley actually was a Western actor primarily before he got into Star Trek. He's in a lot of old Westerns. Plays an old Confederate doctor in one. He plays or Confederate officer. I mean, he plays a gunslinger, and I've seen a bunch of stuff. And then Nimoy was in a lot of them, including after Star Trek. I think he played the villain in Yul Brynner Western called Catlow with Richard Crenna. Yes, I have heard about this thing about the problem with Gibson's dog and remaking the Dam Busters. And kudos to him for sticking to his guns. But you know what? The original doesn't really need to be remade. If you want to do something, take the original and just put in some modern special effects to clean up some of the stuff. That's really all you have to do. And it helped that actor looked, and what was his name? That played Gibson. He was perfect for that role. So pity Gibson didn't survive the war, but Task Force Gary Cooper's another really good one. I like how he got into trouble for saying the Japanese would probably be our next enemy. There were a lot of people whose careers were getting clipped in the 20s and 30s for pointing out that Japan could be a problem later on. It was, no, you can't say that. Like, well, Pearl Harbor ended that. Okay, Super Heavy, take care of it, brother. You are clear for takeoff. Of course, a bridge too far is a screw up of a plan. Monty, what is it that old Sam from Cheers, when he was in Saving Private Ryan? I think that guy's overrated. And Michael Caine had the best line in the movie. That's the worst. I have worse news than that. What? This is the wide part of the highway. Talk about model building. In a bridge too far, they needed more Sherman tanks, so they made fiberglass castings and put them on little Volkswagen Doodlebugs, and they called them the Doodle tanks or something. And a lot of times, and they put little electric moving tracks on them, but the tires are and you can see that the tank's not moving at the same speed as the tracks. But hey, it worked. Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot he was on the Shoot Out the OK Corral. Yeah, Richard Todd. Thank you guys. Yes, Richard Todd was perfect to play Guy Gibson, and of course Richard Todd was also perfect in The Longest Day, wearing his old para beret. That the para beret he's wearing is that because he had been in the paras, and yeah, Magnificent Seven was great, which you guys all know is a remake of the Kurosawa film, and yeah, that would have been a bad idea. The Russians were, you don't trifle with the Russians. You do not wake the bear. Spirit of St. Louis, great movie. Jimmy Stewart petitioned to that movie. There was another actor that wanted to do the Spirit of St. Louis, another famous actor, but Stewart beat him out for it. There were several people that wanted to play Lindbergh, and this was before everybody knew about Lindbergh's issues, which have come to light in recent years, but oh well. The Great Escape, The Cooler King, Captain Hiltz. If I'm not mistaken, though, that character was the biggest fabrication of the movie, because if I'm not mistaken, the actual Great Escape, I don't think there were any Americans involved, but they had to sell it to the American audience. It was Sinatra, I think, that was originally cast in that part, and then they went with McQueen. One of our aircraft is missing, yeah. Yeah. Cross of Iron, yeah, that was pretty good. I always also kind of like Cross of Iron was a good movie, but I got to be honest, one movie I always found kind of entertaining was there's two names for it: the Misfit Brigade or Wheels of Terror, about a SS penal battalion. So these guys aren't like goose-stepping SS guys; they're a bunch of misfits that got chucked into an SS battalion, basically to be used as cannon fodder. Oh, the green slime, heck yeah! The green slime, the green slime. I will never forget that theme song. When you get right down to it, it's your typical infiltrator in the space station movie. But The Green Slime is a movie that could be, it's just comical when you look at some of it today. But it's one of those movies that's just, it's fun. You could update it, and that would make a viable movie today. It's like Tremors. Tremors is a really good B movie. And even some of the follow-ons. And I always thought that was just a fun movie. You could add, they did Amelia just a few years ago. I went and saw it, and it wasn't bad. Richard Jekyll, man, talk about one of Hollywood's stalwarts. Yeah, from Sven Hassel's book. That's right, Wheels of Terror. Strategic Air Command is a great movie. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, I think Jimmy Stewart might have done that movie for scale because he wanted to help promote the Air Force, because he was a bomber pilot and he was Brigadier General in the reserves. And Das Boot was excellent. I bought one of those, got one of those old cheapo war movie things, had a bunch of really bad second-rate war movies on it. And some of them actually have decent plots. There's poor execution a lot of times by... the problem is just the budget. 633 Squadron's fun, but when you really look at it, you're like, yeah, if you were to made a few changes, it would have been a lot better. Somewhere online I found a picture of the B-47 models they used in the Strategic Air Command, like 3 or 4 of them. They were huge, and they had the working landing gears and everything. All that work, what does it get? 30 seconds of screen time or something? And whatever happened to them, they probably just throw them away when they're done. Ugh. Guys, those model builders in Hollywood are fantastic. And sometimes they use kits. I think he said for the scene in Independence Day where all the jets are on the ramp and they're blowing up, those are just 1/32 scale F-18s. They bought every kit they could find in Southern California. I don't know. Compare the Trimmers graboids to the Dune worms. Bombers B-52. I remember that one. Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and Carl Malden. He ejects him out of the airplane. That's the one scene I always remember. And, but one nice thing about movies is they do often, when a movie comes out, all of a sudden everybody's got to have the model, whether it's the Batmobile or whatever. I'm sure after Top Gun comes out, there'll be a huge push for more F-18 models. So that's something. Oh, Trimmers, absolutely. I got a kick out of that. Guess we can't make fun of Bert's lifestyle no more. Michael Gross plays Burt Gummer, is the only common thread through all 7 of the movies and the TV show. Speaking of the Blue Max, that George Papard actually bought that Moraine Solner parasol plane after the movie was over. Yeah, a guy named Joe was definitely, it was just always was a remake of a guy named Joe, just modernized. Well, there you go with what you got. They had to use it. The Navy had to lend them. From what I've heard Vince Van Hossel was a Swede. I've heard he was a Dane. And but what happened was, some of the stuff in Hossel's book, because it's written from his point of view, people go, "That's not right," but they don't know if it's not right because this was the information as he believed it at the time, and he had bad information, or if he's like when he said he was, we were going to be fighting U.S. Marines, we were terrified of them. Like, no, U.S. Marines didn't serve in the European theater. But it may have been that that's what he was told. So from his point of view, he thought he was telling the truth, or maybe he just made it up. Not that I'm familiar with, but it'd be interesting to see. Well, if I'm not mistaken, Mystery Series 3000, I think their first movie they panned was This Island Earth. I could be wrong, but I think that was it. But maybe it was the Green Slime. Survivor commercials. Yeah, Gross and Gummer. I've seen in some of his Facebook posts. Michael Gross has some issues with being identified as Gummer because he's your typical Hollywood actor type. But he's managed to keep it kind of low key. He doesn't want to bite the hand that feeds him. He also will go in costume as Burt Gummer to hospitals and stuff to kids that have seen the movie and visit them. So that's sweet. Oh, we've been going about an hour and 50 minutes now. I'm going to wrap up here shortly. John Delancey played Q. John Delancey, he's still out doing stuff, but he's played a lot. You've seen him pop up in all kinds of characters. But the thing you have to remember, and I've been in a couple of movies and met a few actors, so the thing you have to remember is they're actors, and I think everybody should work on at least one movie set because you learn real quick that this is all fantasy and imagination. These people are not what they portray themselves to be. They're actors. And, it's okay to love the character, but if the actor is just stay with the character. Don't worry about the actor. They got their own thing, and it's if somebody says that, hey, this character that you love is played by this person who you may not find to your liking, doesn't matter, doesn't it? I still like the character. That's all that matters. That's what I'm there to see. And the person's free to have their opinions and differ from mine. It just means they're wrong. Yeah. A trip to Normandy, especially if you can go with somebody who was there, is definitely a life-changing experience. Okay, Chris. Happy wife, happy life. Original Flight of the Phoenix is a great movie. And, the reason it says bad box art is I'm having trouble when I start this thing. It always latches on to last week's title and won't let me edit it. So once I get done, and it goes, I go in and edit it afterwards. Let me see. If I go here, yeah, I can't. It won't let me open this. Well, what's this? Create a highlight video. Yeah, that's. And I'm afraid if I start monkeying with this thing, I'm going to wind up disconnecting myself or something. One time I went in before I went online and edited it, and it made the changes. Then when I started playing, it was still showing the old stuff. So I haven't quite figured that out yet. Outland was a pretty good movie. I watched A Sense of Scale on how they made Outland and all that other stuff, and they went through all this work to build these beautiful models. I mean, they were fantastic, all these details. And then when I started filming, they were having all these problems with lighting and everything, so I had to start matting stuff, because by the time we were done, we just slapped all the buildings, all these shades of gray, and all that beautiful detail was never seen. I'm like, sorry. Little Boy and Fat Man, yeah, that's the one with Paul Newman. I'll say one thing. Paul Newman, I think, did a pretty accurate portrayal of Leslie Groves, the general that was in charge of that program. And he was not the kind of guy you'd want to work for, but he did get stuff done. Oh God, is this detail? What was that movie? The airplane, where it's like, oh, we're gonna have to land by shifting water around. They're just making up systems on aircraft that didn't exist. Hello. Faulty Towers. We did not start it. Yes, you did. What do you mean? Yeah, you invaded Poland. No, not so far. I'm sure most of you have seen Faulty Towers in their episode The Germans. That's a show that's being canceled by the Glitterati for various things. I'm like, God, you realize that was the 80s. Jeez. Yep. Actually, Leslie Groves doing the Pentagon ahead of schedule under budget is what got him the Manhattan Project and a second star. Oh, everybody's having to go back to work. I understood. Well, we're going on 2 hours. It's about time to put a wrap on this anyway. Just remember, the Flight of the Phoenix is how Paul Mance was killed when that thing came apart on him on landing. You can see the video on YouTube. That was sad. One of Hollywood's greats. Who, by the way, also taught Amelia Earhart how to fly. Or at least how to, fly instruments and stuff. Well, guys, I want y'all to take care. I want to thank you for checking in. I'm going to leave leave this. I'll kill the camera and the mic, but I'll leave this up for a few minutes so that you guys can chat amongst yourselves if you like. Say your goodbyes. Want to appreciate you guys checking in. Hope you had a good time, and kind of threw this one together in a hurry, but it's really more about whatever you guys want to chat about, so no big deal. Oh, shucks, thanks. All right, guys, stand by for video feed termination. If I can figure out which button it is. Oh no, I'm gone.